Some mountains don't wait to be found. They choose the ones brave enough to step into their light. That morning, under silver fog and a wind that felt like memory, Jason, a war-worn veteran, drove through the hollow with his dog Max. Then Max suddenly froze, ears sharp, body tense. Why would a dog hear what no human could? And what was calling them from the shadows below? Moments later, Jason spotted an old man trapped on the cliff's edge, seconds from falling. Saving him would lead Jason and Max to climb the hollow's hidden summit, a vast sunken garden where sunflowers bloom in winter like small golden suns, a secret that could save the whole town or destroy it. Before we begin, where are you watching from? Subscribe and let us know. A thin winter haze drifted over the hollow range, soft as breath and cold enough to turn the air brittle. The fog gathered between the pines like an old secret, deciding whether or not to reveal itself. Jason Keller guided his battered pickup along the narrow mountain road, fingers wrapped loosely around the wheel. At 46, he moved with the quiet heaviness of someone who had carried far too much for far too long. His frame was tall, broad, built like a man meant for hard work, yet his shoulders slumped slightly, as if years of war and the silence that followed had settled there like unshakable snow. A rough beard darkened by streaks of gray traced his jaw, and the lines around his eyes hinted at nights broken by memories he never invited. Beside him sat Max, his 6-year-old German shepherd, posture straight and disciplined. Max's two-toned coat, black saddle fading into warm tan, gleamed despite the dull light. His amber eyes scanned the tree line with steady vigilance, the gaze of a dog who had once served on foreign soil alongside Jason, learning to read danger from wind and vibration. But today, the dog's ears twitched in a restless rhythm, catching something Jason couldn't. Jason exhaled slowly. "You're hearing something, aren't you?" Max didn't bark. Instead, he shifted his paws and leaned toward the cracked window, nostrils flaring sharply. Jason recognized that subtle tension. Max used it in the service when he sensed tremors, distant movement, or a threat hidden beneath noise. The dog's instincts had saved Jason more times than he could count. Back then, Max had been tethered to duty. Now, he was tethered to Jason's sanity. The pickup rounded a tight bend where the road hugged a sheer rock face. Frost made the gravel glitter, and the drop beside them vanished into a white ravine, where a frozen stream wound like a shard of glass. Jason slowed as Max's body suddenly went rigid. Then came the sound, faint, crushed by wind, barely human. A cry. "Help!" Jason hit the brakes. The truck slid slightly before halting. Max shot forward, paws braced on the dashboard, ears knifing upright. Jason stepped out into the sharp cold. Max leapt down beside him, nose immediately low, tail held stiff. The dog circled once, twice, then stopped, staring toward the ravine with an intensity that made Jason's chest tighten. "All right," he murmured. "Lead." Max bounded ahead, each step grounded and deliberate. Jason followed, boots scraping frost. They reached the ridge edge where the wind pressed against them, like a warning hand. Max approached a cluster of tangled brush, sniffed, then emitted a low, pulsing whine. Jason crouched beside him and looked down. That's when he saw the man. An elderly figure lay entangled in a snarl of exposed roots, his body twisted against the rock wall just inches from a fatal drop. His right leg was bent unnaturally. Snow clung to his flannel coat, once red, now sun-bleached, and frost had settled into his white hair. His face carried the weathered lines of someone shaped by mountains rather than time, but his eyes were squeezed shut in pain. Jason's heartbeat snapped into combat rhythm. Actions came before thought. He ran back to the truck, grabbed his survival rope, and anchored it tightly around a pine. Max bit down on the trailing end of the rope, digging his paws firmly into the frozen soil. It wasn't strength alone that mattered. Max kept the line from swaying, held it steady, just like he had during extraction missions overseas. A quiet, dependable anchor. Jason secured the carabiner to his belt and leaned over the edge. "Sir, can you hear me?" he called. The old man's eyelids fluttered. "Help! I'm coming. Stay very still." Jason descended. Frosty stones scraped under his boots. The cold bit into his cheeks. Memories flickered, nights rappelling into collapsed buildings, the smell of dust and cordite, the echo of someone calling for help that Jason reached too late. His breath tightened, but Max's bark from above steadied him, as it always did. Halfway down, a patch of gravel gave way. Jason slipped for a second, dangling, rope burning against his gloves, until Max shifted above, planting himself harder, holding the line firm. Jason caught the ledge and continued. He reached the man and knelt. Up close, the stranger's features told a story. Deep-set blue eyes dulled by exhaustion, a wiry beard tangled by wind, skin browned and creased by decades under open sky. He looked like someone who belonged to the mountains, someone who understood them, and right now they were trying to take him. "I'm Jason," he said, voice steady. "My dog's helping hold the line. We're getting you out of here." The old man gave a weak nod. Jason examined the leg, badly twisted but not broken, and carefully looped the rope around his torso. As he tightened the knots, the man whispered something. Knew someone would come. Jason pressed a hand to his shoulder. "Save your strength." He tugged the rope twice. Max responded instantly, planting himself low and pulling with a slow, controlled force. Jason guided the man upward, placing his body between the old man and the falling gravel. The climb was slow, painful. When they were only a few feet from the top, a sudden rumble shuddered through the cliff. Jason braced just as rock fragments cascaded down. Max barked sharply, warning them. Jason shielded the old man with his body, took a glancing blow across his shoulder, gritted his teeth, and kept moving. Max held the rope steady, unyielding. They reached the ridge. Jason hauled the old man onto solid earth. Max immediately circled him, sniffing his clothes, tail low but intent. The man coughed, chest trembling, and opened his eyes. They were pale blue, clear despite pain. Jason crouched beside him. "Can you tell me your name?" The old man swallowed. "Elliot. Elliot Granger." Jason nodded. "You're safe now." But Elliot suddenly grabbed Jason's sleeve with surprising strength. His fingers were cold, trembling, but filled with a strange urgency. He lifted his other hand and pointed toward the mist-wrapped summit of Hollow Mountain. "There," he rasped. "Up there. The mountain. Hollow chooses who it reveals itself to." Jason exchanged a glance with Max. Something ancient, electric, seemed to pass through the wind. Elliot's breath hitched. "It needs a man who hears the wind and a dog who hears the earth." A soft, almost reverent rumble escaped Max's throat. Jason felt a chill ripple down his spine, one that had nothing to do with the cold. He looked up toward the summit. Clouds curled around it like breath, as if something waited above. Elliot's hand fell away, exhausted. Max stepped closer to Jason and touched his leg with a deliberate, grounding pressure. For the first time in years, Jason felt the pull of something larger than fear, something almost like purpose. Up there, the wind whispered, and Jason knew this was only the beginning. The morning wind climbed the mountain before they did, pushing thin veils of mist over the ridges and braiding them through the branches of ancient firs. Jason Keller tightened his scarf, feeling the sting of cold on his beard, and glanced toward Max, who was already several steps ahead on the narrow trail. The dog moved with purpose, ears up, tail low, muscles taut beneath his thick coat. He was listening to something Jason couldn't hear, the way he always had since the war. Jason unfolded Elliot's worn map. The paper crackled like brittle leaves, its edges softened by years of being folded and refolded. Lines drawn in faded pencil traced a route that zigzagged up Hollow's flank. Elliot hadn't left instructions, only a trembling finger pointing at the summit and words that felt like prophecy. Max paused and released 3 short, clipped howls. The sound echoed off the stone in a pattern Jason had trained him to use during combat extractions. Right direction. Max didn't look back, he simply kept going as if guided by the earth itself. Jason followed. The path steepened quickly. Frost coated the stones, turning them slick, and the wind pushed harder as they gained altitude. Jason kept a hand on the rock wall for balance. Memories flickered. The vibration of helicopters, the smell of diesel, the sting of sandstorms carrying distant gunfire. Back then, Max walked beside him the same way, alert, listening, always half a second ahead of danger. Jason's breath fogged the air, and for a moment he was unsure if the tremor in his chest came from the climb or from the old echoes shaking loose again. Halfway up, they reached a broad ledge where remains of a forgotten mining outpost clung to the mountain. A rusted ore cart lay overturned, and wooden beams sagged under a skin of snow. Jason stepped closer, brushing frost from a cracked jacket hanging on a nail. A barely visible name was stamped inside the collar: R. Granger, Elliot's family. The mountain was no stranger to them. Jason let his fingers linger on the fabric, an odd ache rolling through him, the kind he felt at memorial walls where names of the fallen lived on metal plates that outlasted their breath. Max whined softly, nudging his leg. "Yeah," Jason murmured. "We keep going." They climbed for nearly an hour. As they neared the summit ridge, the mist thinned, replaced by a heavy silence that felt expectant. The wind softened, dropping from a howl to a slow, steady breath. Max raised his nose and stopped so abruptly Jason nearly stumbled into him. The dog stood perfectly still. Then the ridge opened. Jason stepped forward, and everything inside him stilled. The summit was not a peak at all. It was a vast bowl-shaped crater, descending at least 30 meters deep, and inside, illuminated by an opening in the clouds, was a sight that defied winter. Sunflowers, thousands of them, tall stalks, wide golden faces, leaves trembling gently in the mild air rising from beneath the ground. A geothermal current whispered through the soil, warming it like a hidden heartbeat, and allowing the flowers to bloom where snow should have rained. Jason felt his chest pull tight, but not with fear, with awe. "For a man who forgot what beauty felt like," he whispered, "this almost hurts." Max bounded into the field, weaving through the towering stems. His tail rose high, his steps softened. He pressed a paw into the warm soil, ears dipping as though he sensed a pulse beneath his feet, a vibration deep and rhythmic, almost alive. He let out a low, reverent rumble. Jason descended carefully into the bowl. The soil crumbled softly under his boots, warm enough to steam faintly in the chilled air. Sunflowers brushed his shoulders as he passed, their petals glowing like small suns. The scent, fresh, earthy, and impossibly bright, filled the hollow like a hymn. Then Jason saw it. A cabin tucked beneath a natural stone, overhang at the far edge of the bowl. Weathered wood, rock shelter overhead. A small chimney. A stack of chopped firewood, half covered by a tarp tied neatly with rope. There was recent life here. A thin line of heat shimmered from a side vent, evidence of a fire that had burned recently. Jason's instincts tightened. Max slowed, nose brushing the doorframe. He didn't growl. Instead, he pressed one paw gently against the wood, then stepped back. Jason's pulse quickened. Someone was inside. The door opened with a soft creak. A woman stepped out, standing framed by warm light behind her. Tall, lean, dressed in a thick olive-green parka patched at the elbows. Her light brown hair was tucked beneath a hand-knit cap. Her cheekbones were sharp, framed by skin, pale from cold, but flushed slightly from the heat inside the cabin. Her eyes, gray-green and steady, held a mix of caution and quiet understanding. She moved like someone comfortable with the wilderness, balanced, grounded, aware of her surroundings. "Don't worry," she said gently. "If you're here because of Elliot, you're not trespassing." Jason didn't relax, but he eased his stance. "He's safe. We found him yesterday. He's injured but alive." Her breath caught, shoulders dropping a fraction. "Thank God." She pressed a hand briefly to her chest. "I've been up here for 2 days waiting for him. He was supposed to meet me for a survey, but when he didn't show, I thought Hollow had taken him like it takes others." Jason stepped closer. "You knew Elliot well?" She nodded. "I'm Sarah Aldrin, park researcher. Elliot and I documented rare ecological pockets together, places like this, where the mountain behaves like a living organism." She pointed at the sunflowers. "He protected these places, called them the mountain's heartbeats." Jason studied her. There was both strength and softness in her demeanor, like someone shaped by solitude but not consumed by it. She held her notebook against her side, fingers tapping a slow, thoughtful rhythm. A habit, Jason guessed, from cataloging findings and worries alike. Max approached her slowly. Sarah knelt with surprising grace, offering her hand for him to sniff. Max accepted, the tension in his shoulders easing. "You must be Max," she murmured. "Elliot talked about a dog who listens better than men." Jason huffed a quiet breath. "He does." Sarah straightened. "If Elliot sent you here, then he meant for you to see something." Her gaze drifted across the bowl. Hollow chooses who it lets in. Before Jason could question her further, Max barked, 3 sharp notes, not of danger, but discovery. They followed him to a cluster of sunflowers. The soil was disturbed, as though someone had knelt there long ago. Jason parted the flowers and saw it, a braided wreath made of dried sunflower stems, woven with care and placed deliberately into the earth. Jason touched the wreath. The stems were old, years old, yet preserved by the warmth. Sarah inhaled sharply. Elliot only wove those for places that mattered, places he believed were connected to the deeper rhythms of Hollow. Jason looked at Max, who sat solemnly beside the wreath, his amber eyes fixed on the cabin, as though expecting something unseen to emerge. The wind shifted, the sunflowers leaned slightly, all in the same direction, as though bowing to something beneath their roots. Jason felt the ground pulse faintly, almost like a heartbeat. Whatever Elliot wanted them to find, Hollow was just beginning to reveal it. The sun had barely risen above the ridgeline when Jason sat on the front step of the cabin, drinking in the warmth radiating from the hidden bowl. The sunflowers below him stirred gently, as though waking from their own winter dreams. Max rested at his feet, chin on his paws, amber eyes half closed but alert to every shift of sound. The crater hummed faintly beneath them, a vibration subtle enough that most people would miss it, but Jason felt it in his bones. Max, even more so. Sarah was inside, cataloging Elliot's journals on the wooden table. Smoke rose in a thin line from the chimney, its scent mingling with the sweet notes of warm soil. Jason tried to settle into the quiet, but something within him was pacing, waiting. The crunch of boots on the path snapped him upright. Max's ears shot forward, body locking into place. His tail stiffened, not in threat, but in alert curiosity. Jason stood slowly. A figure emerged from the edge of the sunflower field, breathless and red-cheeked from the climb. He was a man in his early 50s, slightly overweight, but with the build of someone who once played football in younger years. His hair, thick and pepper gray, was combed with meticulous care that the mountain wind immediately ruined. He wore a dark navy overcoat that didn't belong anywhere near a summit, mud splattered on its hem. His round glasses clung desperately to his nose, fogging with each breath. When he saw Jason, he doubled over, hands on his knees, wheezing. "Mr. Keller, I presume?" Jason stepped forward. "Depends who's asking." The man extended a hand, still breathing hard. "David Mercer, attorney at law for Hollow County, and," he straightened, attempting to gather dignity, "executor of Elliot Granger's estate." Sarah stepped out of the cabin then, notebook in hand. She studied the newcomer with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Max sniffed the air and gave one cautious bark. Mercer raised both hands. "I assure you, I'm no danger to anyone, except perhaps myself. Climbing that trail was an act of bravery I was not prepared for." Jason crossed his arms. "Elliot had an estate." Mercer nodded vigorously, adjusting his glasses. Indeed, he did. And according to the documents he filed with my office 2 years ago, he named you, Jason Keller, as the legal heir to his property, including... He paused, sweeping his arm toward the radiant field. This entire summit. Jason blinked. That doesn't make sense. I barely knew him. Mercer shuffled through his satchel, pulling free a brown envelope sealed with wax. He seemed to believe you would come. His will is unusually poetic, very unlike his previous filings. You should read it yourself. Jason hesitated, then opened the seal. Inside was a handwritten letter, Elliot's handwriting shaky yet deliberate, to the one who hears the wind and to the dog who hears the earth. I leave the care of Sunflower Hollow. This mountain needs a keeper, someone who listens, someone who stays. Jason's breath thickened in his throat. Max nudged his leg gently, sensing the shift in him. Sarah leaned closer. He meant you, Jason. He always talked about the mountain choosing its people. Jason shook his head. I don't even know what I'm supposed to do with something like this. Mercer cleared his throat. There's more. Elliot left journals, dozens of them. Observations, maps, geological readings, climate patterns. And something else. He reached into his satchel again and pulled out a slim, leather-bound notebook tied with a faded cord. This one was sealed with instructions. Give to Jason Keller. Sarah frowned. He never showed me that one. Jason opened the notebook carefully. Inside, the pages were filled with sketches, cross-sections of the crater, notes about geothermal vents, temperature fluctuations, root patterns of the sunflowers. But one phrase appeared again and again, underlined in different colors. Light within the earth. Sarah stepped closer, curiosity brightening her eyes. That's what he called the geothermal phenomenon here. He said the mountain breathed warmth like a living creature. Jason flipped through more pages. Elliot had documented what looked like a network of glowing mineral veins, sketched in soft yellows and golds, that snaked beneath the crater like arteries. Notes in the margins spoke of sustainability, continuity, life force, the mountain's heart. Then one line caught Jason's attention, written shakier than the others. If misused, the heart will dim. If protected, it will heal. Sarah whispered, He thought this place was alive. Mercer rubbed his temples. Frankly, I'm not equipped to understand the metaphysical. Jason shook his head. This isn't metaphysical. Elliot was mapping something real, something alive under our feet. As if answering, the ground thrummed faintly, so soft it could be mistaken for imagination. But Max lifted his head and pressed his paw against the soil, vibrating with attention. Mercer stepped back nervously. Is that normal? Sarah nodded calmly. The geothermal vents produce pulses. Elliot believed the pulses responded to disturbances on the mountain. She glanced toward Jason. Maybe they respond to people too. Jason swallowed. So what now? I'm suddenly the caretaker of a mountain I barely understand? Sarah closed her notebook thoughtfully. Not alone. Elliot wouldn't have left everything to you if he didn't believe you could do it. And Max? She knelt and stroked the German shepherd gently. He already knows this place. Look at him. Max rested his head on Jason's boot, quiet, certain, loyal. The message was unmistakable. Stay. Jason stared at the sunflowers, swaying in their warm cradle of earth. For the first time in many years, he felt the faint outline of something he'd lost in the war, purpose. Mercer handed him the rest of the estate documents. There will be paperwork, of course, but Elliot intended this place to be yours. Jason didn't answer right away. Instead, he sank to the ground, Max leaning into him, the vibration of the soil pulsing faintly through his palms. This wasn't just land, it was a heart, and Elliot had handed it to him to keep beating. Night settled over Sunflower Hollow, with a strange tension that Jason couldn't quite name. The glow of the geothermal field warmed the air around the cabin, but something colder crept along the edges of the bowl, slipping in through the cracks like an unwelcome guest. The sunflowers swayed even when there was no wind, as though restless. Max had been pacing for hours. The dog rarely behaved this way, not without reason. His ears flicked toward the ridgeline and back again, his body low but alert, paws pressing into the soil, as if listening to vibrations rising from far beneath. Jason had seen this behavior during their deployment, when Max sensed underground movements, tunnels, traps, or heavy machinery. But there were no machines on Hollow, at least none that should be. Jason rose from the wooden bench outside the cabin, rubbing the stiffness from his shoulder. "What is it, boy?" Max didn't bark. He only turned his head sharply toward the far edge of the summit, the place where the bowl tapered into a narrow drop. His eyes, amber and intense, reflected the faint starlight like small embers. From inside the cabin, Sarah looked up from Elliot's journals. "He's been doing that all night," she murmured. "He hears something we don't." Jason nodded slowly. "He's never wrong about ground movement. Something's happening under us." Before Sarah could respond, Max froze. His tail stiffened. A deep rolling growl rumbled through his chest. Then Jason heard it too. A metallic clink carried faintly through the night. Rhythmic, deliberate, not natural. Sarah's eyes widened. "Is that drilling?" Jason didn't answer. He grabbed his old parka, slung it over his shoulders, and slipped the heavy wrench, Elliot's old rusted tool, from the cabin door frame. He didn't like weapons anymore, but he trusted tools. Max pressed against his leg, ready. They moved silently around the curve of the bowl, sticking to the darkest patches where rock overhangs hid them from view. Jason's boots made no sound on the soft soil. Max walked like a shadow beside him. The closer they came to the ridge, the more the ground shivered, subtle tremors, like the heartbeat of Hollow faltering. Jason had felt tremors like this once in Kandahar, when construction crews dug too close to unstable ground. It rarely ended well. As they reached the lip of the summit, Jason crouched and peered over. Floodlights, small, portable ones, were wedged into cracks of the slope below. Their white beams slashed across the stone like knives. 3 men stood on a narrow ledge 20 feet down, operating a compact drilling rig that vibrated violently against the cliff face. Jason recognized the logo printed on their heavy jackets, North Peak Minerals. He cursed under his breath, not with profanity, but with the quiet fury of someone who understood exactly what was happening. Sarah pressed beside him, eyes narrowing. "They're drilling!" directly into the geothermal channel. Jason felt his stomach drop. "If they breach the vent, the warmth feeding the sunflowers will die," she finished, voice shaking. "The whole ecosystem collapses." Max growled again, this time more sharply, loud enough that Jason gently touched his neck to soothe him. One of the men looked up sharply. He was tall, easily over 6 feet, with a shaved head and a thick brown beard dusted with frost. His build was muscular, heavy at the shoulders, the type of body forged through years of manual labor. Light reflected off the scars along his jaw and neck, thin, pale lines that suggested rough history. His name tag, half torn, hung loosely on his jacket. B. Hardin. He spoke with a gravelly voice. "Kill the lights. Someone's up there." The other 2 men complied instantly. One was average height, hunched slightly, his hands trembling at the controls, perhaps from cold, perhaps from nerves. The third was younger, wiry, with a tattoo curling up his neck like a climbing vine. They had the look of contractors hired for muscle, not mountain expertise. Jason's breath fogged against the cold as he watched them pack their tools quickly but not quickly enough. He'd dealt with men like this in the war, the ones who took orders without asking why, who didn't care about the land beneath their boots unless it paid. Hardin tilted his head, listening. "Pack up the rig. Company wants a clean extraction before dawn." Jason whispered, "They're not just testing the rock. They're searching for Elliot's light veins." Sarah drew a sharp breath. "They want the geothermal minerals, that glow in the sketches. If those veins are rich in phosphorescent compounds or rare earth elements, they'll strip Hollow to the bone," Jason finished. Max shifted his weight, staring at the men with a focus that bordered on predatory. Jason felt Max's body align against his leg, steady and resolute. He knew what that meant. We stand now, or we lose everything later. Hardin barked orders. "Get the secondary drill. We hit the seam tonight." Sarah whispered urgently. "Jason, they can't. Once they cross into the vent wall, the entire heat system destabilizes. Everything Elliot protected, gone." Jason tightened his grip around the old wrench. The cold metal felt like the memory of another life, one where he fought because someone had to. He crouched lower, considering options. We can't outnumber them, but we can scare them off. Sarah placed a steadying hand on his arm. "What's the plan?" Jason's eyes hardened. "First, we stop the drill. Then we find out who's behind this." Sarah nodded, her breath steadying. She wasn't a fighter. Her strength was mind, not muscle. But Jason saw courage flicker in her eyes all the same. Max's growl deepened. It vibrated into Jason's bones, a warning and a vow. Jason whispered, "Easy, boy. On my count." But before he could move, Hardin shouted, "Hurry it up! I want ground cracked in 5 minutes." Jason felt something inside him snap, a quiet, solid line of resolve. He rose from behind the rocks, tall and unflinching, the wrench clenched in his hand. Max stepped beside him, body rigid, ears forward, pupils bright like twin embers in the dark. Jason's voice cut through the night. "You're done drilling on this mountain." Below, the men froze. Hardin lifted his head slowly. The mountain wind held its breath. And Max, unwavering, placed himself half a step ahead of Jason, guardian, partner, anchor, as though telling the shadows below, "This mountain has a keeper now." The storm hit Sunflower Hollow with a violence Jason had not felt since the winter deployments overseas. One moment the sky was sharp and clear. The next it seemed to collapse inward, unleashing sheets of white that battered the mountain bowl like fists. The wind screamed through the sunflowers, bending their tall stalks until they looked like golden guardians bowing under pressure. Snow swirled across the summit, fierce enough to erase footprints seconds after they were made. Max sensed the danger long before the sky broke. He pressed his shoulder against Jason's knee, tail stiff, ears pinned forward into the wind. His thick sable coat bristled in waves, and he let out a deep, urgent rumble before tugging Jason's parka sleeve with his teeth. Jason pulled the hood tight. "All right, boy, let's move." Sarah stepped out of the cabin. The hood of her long olive-gray trench coat whipped sideways by the wind. Her tall, slender frame bent slightly as she braced herself against a gust. Her auburn hair, tied back earlier, now spilled loose in bright ribbons across her shoulders. She squinted through the white wall of snow, building along the ridge. "Jason, this is turning into a whiteout. The old cabin might not hold if the wind shifts." Jason nodded grimly. "We shelter in the basin. Elliot built the lower ring for a reason." Max barked sharply, 3 short bursts, the same signal he used on patrol when leading towards safer ground. Jason didn't waste a breath. "He's right. We go now." They descended carefully into the bowl of the hollow, boots sinking into rapidly thickening drifts. The geothermal vents under the earth released faint columns of warm mist between the sunflowers, breathing warmth into the basin like the steady exhale of a sleeping giant. The farther they moved inward, the gentler the wind became, shielded by stone walls and the ring of tall flowers. Snow collected lightly on petals, but melted on the warm soil. Max circled twice, checking the perimeter, then settled beside Jason, chest rising in controlled breaths. The storm roared above them, unseen but unmistakably powerful. Sarah pressed her gloves to her cheeks, trying to warm them. "We waited out here. With luck, this calms in an hour or 2. Jason wished he believed it. The Hollow rarely saw storms this early in winter. Something about it felt wrong, too sudden, too sharp, and Jason had long ago learned to trust disturbances that felt unnatural. He crouched, running his hands across the ground. He could feel a faint tremor, not the drilling, but something like pressure shifting deep in the mountain. "Hollow's reacting to the cold," he murmured. "Ground's tightening." Sarah's brow furrowed. "If the vents constrict under rapid temperature drop, steam pockets could form. We need to make sure no one is near the vent channels." Max's head shot up. The dog turned sharply toward the eastern rim of the summit, ears, slicing through the wind like twin radar dishes. Suddenly he bolted, snow spraying behind him as he sprinted up the slope toward the ridge. Jason's heart slammed. "Max!" He chased after the dog, boots digging hard into the snow. Sarah struggled behind them, but she kept pace as best she could. The closer Jason got to the rim, the louder the wind became, not just howling but whistling, the shrill cry of air cutting across metal, stone, and something else. A sound broke through the storm, a human scream. Jason froze. Then another shout. Panicked, terrified, muffled by the gale. Max howled back, a sharp cry that pierced through the storm like a flare. Jason forced himself up the last few feet until he reached a ledge overlooking the cliff. What he saw below made his blood run hot despite the freezing air. 3 workers, North Peak jackets recognizable even through the white chaos, were stranded along the narrow drilling path. Their floodlights, half buried in snow, flickered wildly. One of the men clung to a rope line that swung violently, while another dangled from a section of broken ledge. But it was the youngest, the slim, dark-haired technician, who was in the greatest danger. The ledge beneath him had crumbled into a sheer drop. Snow and wind battered his back, and his gloved hands desperately clawed at the broken rock. A coil of wire lay tangled around his waist, but the anchored end had snapped loose. Jason dropped to his knees, gripping the ridge. "Hold on! Don't move!" The young man gasped, voice trembling. It was supposed to be a quick scan. They said the storm wouldn't hit until later. His legs dangled over the abyss, boots scraping against empty air. Max crawled forward beside Jason, belly low, claws digging deep for grip. His body language was unmistakable. "Let me anchor you." Jason had used the maneuver before. He wrapped his climbing harness around his torso, grabbed the emergency rope clipped to his belt, and looped the other end around Max's reinforced chest strap. Max braced, muscles tensed, body lowering into a powerful stance that distributed weight across all 4 limbs. Jason took a deep breath. Then he went over the edge. The wind hammered his face immediately, freezing his eyelashes. His boots struck the rock wall, and he rappelled downward in short, controlled drops. Max held firm above, the rope taut. Jason felt the dog's strength through every breath, every brace, every subtle shift of weight. "Hey!" Jason shouted against the wind. "What's your name?" The young man looked up, eyes wide and frightened. He was in his mid-20s, lean, with jet black hair plastered against his forehead. He had a narrow face with soft features that made him look younger than he was. His stubble-covered jaw shook violently from the cold. His badge, half hidden beneath layers of snow, read, "Ethan Vale." "Ethan!" Jason repeated. "I'm coming to you. I need you to listen." Ethan nodded weakly, though his arms trembled with fatigue. Jason reached him, sliding sideways along the loose rock. He secured a carabiner onto Ethan's belt harness, then onto his own. "Okay, you're safe. I've got you." Ethan made a choked sound, halfway between a sob and relief. I tried to tell them the ground was unstable. Hardin didn't care. He said I was being dramatic." Jason's jaw tightened, Hardin again. Max barked above, one sharp warning. The ledge shifted under Ethan's boot. "No time," Jason muttered. "We're going up." He braced his boots and pushed off. Max pulled with a sudden surge of strength that sent all 3 upward in a controlled arc. Snow blasted their backs as they rose inch by inch. Sarah reached the rim and grabbed Jason's arm, adding her strength to the pull. Together, they dragged Ethan over the edge just as the ledge he'd been clinging to broke away, shattering into the gorge below. Ethan collapsed into the snow, gasping. Max nudged his shoulder with a gentle whine. Jason placed a steady hand on the young man's back. "Easy. You're safe." Ethan's breath shook. He stared at Max with wide eyes full of gratitude, then met Jason's. "I didn't want to be part of this anymore. North Peak. They're not what they say." Jason recognized the look in Ethan's face. He'd seen it in young soldiers who realized too late they'd been following the wrong commander. Snow continued to whip around them, but something deeper settled in the air. A shift, a choice. Jason nodded slowly. Good. Because starting tonight, you're with us. For 2 days, the storm pinned Sunflower Hollow beneath a sky as white as bone. Snow clung to the cabin roof in thick ridges, and the wind twisted around the rock walls like a restless spirit unwilling to sleep. In the dim interior of the cabin, Jason lay half-conscious, battered by exhaustion and the familiar pull of nightmares he had fought for years. His breaths were uneven, shallow, and every now and then his shoulders jerked as if some unseen weight pressed down on him. Max refused to leave his side. The dog lay curled against Jason's ribs, his warm sable coat rising and falling with every breath. When Jason muttered in his sleep, Max nudged his chin under Jason's hand or pushed his head into Jason's chest in the same slow, grounding pressure trained canines used to pull their handlers out of panic spirals. His amber eyes stayed half open, alert even in moments of stillness. Sarah kept watch as well. She moved quietly around the small cabin, her tall frame brushing past the narrow counter where she boiled water or warmed broth. Her sharp, freckled features softened with worry each time she checked Jason's temperature. Strands of auburn hair escaped her braid, framing her olive-toned face like wisps of smoke. She had seen overworked wildlife rescuers collapse from fatigue before, but something about Jason's fall unsettled her more deeply. On the morning of the third day, sunlight finally cut through the storm. Thin beams pierced the cabin window and settled across Jason's face like warm fingertips. His eyelids fluttered open, breath catching in his throat as he recognized Max's heavy presence against him. "You kept watch, huh?" Jason whispered. Max's tail gave one slow thump, the kind he reserved for moments of relief rather than excitement. Jason scratched behind his ear, feeling the remaining tremor in his own fingers. "You scared us," Sarah murmured from the table. Her voice, usually crisp and direct, now carried a quiet warmth. "You pushed past every limit you had." Jason tried sitting up. Max shifted immediately, bracing his body along Jason's side to help him rise. The gesture reminded Jason of rescue missions overseas, Max always anchoring him when the world shook. "I'm all right," he said, though his voice was rough as gravel. "Storms eased?" "Mostly," Sarah replied. "The basin held. Your dog's instincts probably saved all of us." Jason looked down at Max, who sat tall and regal with snow-dusted whiskers and a gaze full of unwavering loyalty. "He's carried me through worse," Jason said softly. The oath hung in the air, an acknowledgement of the bond that had taken years to build and had only deepened since they arrived at Hollow. That afternoon, stronger on his feet, Jason noticed a stack of leather-bound journals tucked beneath Elliot's weathered desk. Sarah helped drag the crate into the sunlight, pouring through the window. Dust lifted in faint gold flecks. Around them, turning the small room into a quiet chapel of memory. The journals varied in age, some pages crisp with recent ink, others yellowed and frayed at the edges. Elliot Ridge had written with a neat, looping hand, each line steady even in the oldest books. Jason opened the earliest dated volume. "The land breathes," he read aloud, "and where it breathes warmest, life returns first." Sarah leaned beside him, eyes narrowing with interest. He started studying geothermal anomalies 30 years ago, before the mines closed, before the drilling companies came, before anyone knew sunflowers could grow in the snow, Jason murmured. He turned the page. There were diagrams of underground water routes, cross-sections of the mountain, temperature charts showing rises and drops. One map showed a network of interconnected hot water veins running like glowing roots beneath the bowl. At the center was a marked point Elliot had circled dozens of times. Primary vent, do not breach. Jason felt a chill despite the warmth of the cabin. "North Peak drilled close to this," he said. "Too close," Sarah agreed. "If they hit a pressure node, the whole system could collapse. Ground heat escapes, water freezes, and Sunflower Hollow dies." Jason swallowed hard. The image of the golden field, alive even in winter, trembling under the storm, burned in his thoughts. Elliot wasn't just tending flowers, he was guarding a living engine. Max rose suddenly, his ears pointed forward, nose twitching as he walked toward the doorway leading outside. He pressed a paw against a specific patch of floorboards. Jason's gaze sharpened. "That again?" he murmured. "He's been doing that since yesterday." Sarah knelt beside the dog. "What is it, Max?" Max gave a soft huff and pawed again, more firmly. Jason crouched and placed his palm against the ground. Warmth pulsed through the wood, faint but rhythmic, like a heartbeat. The dog's eyes lifted toward Jason, serious and certain. He had felt that heat all along, the mountain's breath. Jason exhaled sharply. "He's marking the heat nodes. He knows where the ground's alive." Sarah nodded slowly. "Dogs feel temperature through their paws better than humans ever could. Max might be tracking the geothermal veins without realizing it." Jason's jaw tightened with realization. "We need to map them, all of them. If people don't understand what's under their feet, they'll think this place is just pretty. And they'll let North Peak tear it apart," Sarah finished. Jason opened another journal, diagrams, notes, letters written to no one and everyone. "If anything ever happens to me, tell the town what this place truly is." He felt Elliot's quiet plea rising between the pages. Jason closed the book gently. "We're telling them, all of them." Sarah studied him. "Are you ready for that? Standing in front of a whole town, convincing skeptics, challenging the company?" Jason looked at Max, who had settled at his feet again, his head resting gently atop Jason's boot in a gesture of silent encouragement. "I wasn't ready to be alive after the war," he said softly. "But Max stayed with me until I was. I owe Hollow the same loyalty." Sarah's eyes softened, a rare vulnerability breaking through her composed demeanor. "Then we'll do it together." Jason squeezed the journal, feeling the rough leather edges bite into his palms. A grounding pain, a reminder of the weight he now carried. Outside, the storm clouds thinned, revealing the sun hovering low above the bowl. Its rays pierced through the drifting steam rising from the warm soil, illuminating the sunflowers in an otherworldly shimmer. The petals glowed like hundreds of golden flames. Max wandered out onto the balcony, nose lifted to the breeze. He barked once, soft, almost reverent, at the fields below. Sarah nudged Jason's shoulder. "Looks like he thinks it's time." Jason nodded. "Yeah, time to give Hollow a voice." The wind swept through the bowl, bending the sunflowers into a single, unified sway, as if the Hollow itself agreed. Jason didn't know what storm North Peak would bring next, but he knew one truth more clearly than anything. The mountain was alive, and he and Max were its guardians now. The storm had barely cleared when Jason made his decision. By late afternoon, the clouds thinned into ribbons of cold gray, and the air carried a crisp clarity that sharpened the edges of the valley. Sunflower Hollow glowed in the distance, a bowl of golden steam, but Jason knew a secret could not stay silent any longer, not when the land itself was in danger. He stood in the town square of Ridgeford, a broad open space paved with old river stones. The square was surrounded by a cluster of buildings, a bait shop run by a stout, bearded fisherman, a bakery with frost on its wooden sign, a hardware store whose neon light flickered at odd intervals. Above them all rose the steeple of the small church, white paint peeling, but its bell still strong in the wind. Jason and Sarah worked side by side, setting up a large projection screen at the center of the square. Sarah's tall frame moved with practiced grace, her long auburn braids swaying each time she secured a cable or adjusted a clamp. Her olive-toned face was flushed from the cold, but her hazel eyes glowed with purpose. "You really think they'll come?" she asked. Jason glanced around. "If they care for this town the way Elliot believed they do, they'll come." Max, sitting at attention near Jason's boots, huffed once, his version of agreement. His fur caught the early dusk light, giving him a faint bronze aura. Children passing by paused to pet him, their hands disappearing into his thick coat. He accepted every touch with stoic dignity, but his eyes never stopped scanning the perimeter. By the time night settled, the square filled with townspeople, elderly couples wrapped in thick coats, fishermen shaking melted snow off their boots, teens sharing thermoses of hot cocoa, mothers tugging mittens onto their toddlers' hands. Among them walked Pastor Miriam Doyle, the town's longtime minister. She was in her late 60s with hair the color of soft winter frost and a face lined from years of listening more than speaking. Her calm presence grounded the crowd as she greeted people with a gloved hand on their forearm. Jason stepped forward and nodded to Sarah, who powered on the projector. The screen flickered, then burst into life with an image of Sunflower Hollow. Gasps rippled through the square. The basin appeared glowing and surreal, golden petals shimmering with trapped warmth, steam rolling like morning breath over the soil. For decades, Jason began, his voice steady but weighted. Elliott Ridge protected something no one else knew existed, a geothermal system beneath Hollow that keeps this sunflower field alive all year. If that system is damaged, if the pressure vents break, the Hollow dies. The murmurs grew louder, grief and disbelief woven through them. To many townsfolk, sunflowers were memories of childhood, of fields once stretched across Ridgeford before the mines dried the land. Jason clicked to the next slide, a cross-section from Elliott's journal. This is the network below the bowl. It's fragile, more intricate than anything built by human hands. He paused. And 2 nights ago, North Peak drilled into its outer walls without permission. Anger surged through the crowd like a tide. Some shouted, some shook their heads. Pastor Miriam closed her eyes as if in prayer. Jason felt Max lean against his leg. The dog's presence was a quiet reminder to stay centered. Before he could continue, the crowd parted. 3 figures in dark corporate coats walked into the square. North Peak Minerals. Leading them was Marcus Hardin, a man in his early 50s with a clean-shaven jaw as sharp as the mountain wind, and a body built like a chiseled block of granite. His expensive wool coat rode stiffly over his broad shoulders, and his deep-set, steel-blue eyes glinted with cold certainty. A thin scar crossed his right eyebrow. Word around town was he'd gotten it during a construction collapse years ago, an incident that left him with a lifelong fear of losing control. It made him ruthless, always needing the upper hand. Flanking him were 2 company reps, younger, both carrying sleek briefcases. Hardin raised a folder and spoke with a voice trained for command. North Peak has obtained an emergency inspection authorization. As of tonight, Sunflower Hollow is under review for geological safety. We will need immediate access. Boos rose across the crowd. Some shouted protests. Others cursed under their breath. Sarah stepped forward. "You think we'll let you touch that mountain after what you did?" Hardin smirked. Allegations from a washed-up surveyor and a handful of townsfolk won't stop legal procedure. Before Jason could respond, someone moved through the crowd with controlled urgency. Ethan Vale. The young technician Jason rescued 2 nights earlier had cleaned himself up. His dark hair was combed back, though still damp from the melting snow. He wore a simple brown jacket too thin for the cold, his narrow face pale but determined. The bruise on his temple, left from the storm, added a solemn weight to his appearance. He stepped directly between Jason and Hardin. "I worked for North Peak," Ethan said loudly. His voice quivered but didn't break. "And I'm here to testify that Hardin ordered unauthorized drilling. We compromised the vent wall. We were told to lie if anyone asked." Hardin's expression froze. The reps exchanged alarmed glances. Ethan held up a USB drive. "I have time-stamped data logs and footage." The crowd erupted. Gasps, shouts, fury. Someone yelled, "Arrest him!" Someone else called, "He could have killed our valley!" Max barked once, deep, commanding, cutting through the noise like a judge's gavel. The crowd immediately quieted, startled by the sudden authority in the dog's voice. Then something extraordinary happened. A fisherman named Rob Harlow, a barrel-chested man with a tangled salt and pepper beard, lifted a burning torch high above his head. "No one touches Hollow," he growled. His face, weathered by decades on frozen lakes, held the unwavering look of a man defending home. One by one, townsfolk raised their torches or lanterns. The baker, the librarian, teens, parents, elders from the church. Pastor Miriam herself stepped forward with a small oil lantern glowing warmly in her hand. Soon the entire square was encircled by a ring of firelight, flickering gold and red across determined faces. Jason felt the air shift. The town, this fragile, aging, hidden community, was standing for something together. Hardin took a step back. For the first time, uncertainty cracked through his mask of confidence. Jason turned to Max. The dog lifted his head, golden eyes reflecting dozens of flames. He walked to the center of the circle, and there, under the rising torches and the soft glow of projected sunflowers, Max tipped his head toward the sky and released 3 sharp, resonant howls. The sound pulsed across the square, echoing against the church walls, the stone roads, the hearts of every listener. It felt like a declaration, a vow, a spark. People shouted with renewed resolve. Hardin's reps faltered. Even Pastor Miriam whispered, "The mountain has spoken." Jason placed a hand on Max's back, and the dog pressed firmly into his palm, steadying him, reminding him they were not alone. Sunflower Night had become something else entirely, a movement, a defense, a promise made, together by an entire town. Spring crept up the mountain in slow, deliberate breaths. Snow retreated first from the cliffs, then from the winding mule paths, until finally the last of the white crust pulled away from Sunflower Hollow's warm soil. Each morning, the sun broke over the rim of the bowl like a lantern being lifted by unseen hands, illuminating the golden field below. Jason stood at the edge of the overlook, hands resting on the railing he had rebuilt from weathered pine. Max sat beside him, his tail making slow sweeps across the planks, eyes fixed on the valley, as if taking inventory of every shift the land made. It had been 3 quiet weeks since the night the whole town stood, with torches beneath the projector screen. In the days that followed, lawyers, state conservation officers, and environmental inspectors streamed into Ridgeford. North Peak Minerals had attempted appeal after appeal, but Ethan's data, the town's testimony, and Elliott's old journals formed a case as solid as bedrock. In the end, the ruling came quickly. Sunflower Hollow was to be designated a protected community conservation site. All drilling operations were banned. Jason thought he would feel triumphant when the decision came down. But the emotion that hit him first was relief. Deep, bone-heavy relief, washing over him like warm water over frostbitten skin. Sunflower Hollow wasn't his. It belonged to everyone who needed a place that didn't demand anything but presence. A place where silence was not empty, but healing. He spent the first week repairing the cabin roof, reinforcing the beams, clearing paths through the snowmelt. Sarah helped when she could, arriving with work gloves and a canteen slung over her shoulder. She moved with quiet strength, her auburn braid whipping in the wind as she carried boards or hammered nails. Sometimes she brought supplies sent up by townsfolk, fresh bread from the bakery, a set of handmade mugs, a knitted blanket from Pastor Miriam. But most of all, she brought conversation. "People want to come," she told him one afternoon, brushing her hair from her freckled forehead. Veterans, widows, folks who've lost someone or just feel tired in their bones. There's talk about turning this into a sanctuary. Jason leaned on his hammer, breath fogging in the cool spring air. "You mean like a retreat?" "More like a safe place," Sarah replied. "Somewhere people can breathe." Max trotted over, dropping a piece of driftwood at Jason's feet, his way of joining any serious discussion. Jason rubbed his ears. "You hear that, buddy? Your mountain's getting company." Max puffed out a short chuff, as if approving. By mid-April, the first visitors arrived. The first was Tom Lively, a Vietnam veteran in his late 70s. Tom was tall despite the stoop in his spine, his skin a tan leather tone, and his silver hair cut in a no-nonsense crop. He wore a faded service jacket with worn patches that looked like they had stories stitched into their frayed edges. Tom talked little, but when he did, his voice carried the gravel of long roads traveled. Jason led him down the newly built path. Tom walked with a cane in one hand and paused often, not from pain, but from wonder. "When's the last time you saw sunflowers in snow country?" Jason asked gently. Tom shook his head. "Haven't seen sunflowers since '72, he murmured. "Feels like stepping back into something I thought I'd lost." Max walked beside Tom the entire time, matching his slower pace, occasionally nosing his leg when the ground shifted. Halfway down, Tom reached a hand out and let it rest on Max's head. A tremor passed through him, decorated soldier, hardened man, and yet his eyes glistened. "Good boy," Tom whispered. "You're anchored to this place, ain't you?" Jason nodded. He feels the land better than anyone. The second visitor was Anna Whitford, a widow in her early 60s. She had warm brown skin, deep-set expressive eyes, and a soft presence like steady candlelight. Her husband had passed the previous winter, leaving her with a house too quiet to bear. She came searching for somewhere the air doesn't feel heavy. When Anna stood among the sunflowers, her hands trembling over the petals, a smile slowly bloomed on her face, the kind that had been absent for months. "This place listens," she said softly. Jason believed her. More came. A single mother with her shy little boy. A retired coal miner whose nightmares woke him 3 times a night. A young man who had lost his father and brought an old sketchbook to draw the sunflowers as if capturing pieces of his memory. Jason made time for every one of them. He built benches along the ridge. He added lantern poles that flickered warm light against the cliffs. He set stones along the path where the footing was tricky. Max became the guide, the guardian of every visitor. The dog instinctively chose who needed gentle company and who needed quiet distance. Children followed him like he was a moving storybook. Older veterans sat with him for hours, letting his steady presence ease the tension in their limbs. One morning, Jason woke early, a soft breeze brushing against the cabin's windows. Outside, the first sunflower buds of the season broke through the soil, tiny green spirals pushing bravely toward the sun. He carried a crate of young sunflower plants to the very center of the bowl. It was a raw patch of earth, warmed from below by the geothermal vents. He knelt, digging with his hands. The soil was warm, almost comforting, like a heartbeat beneath his palms. Sarah joined him, carrying a small metal watering can. "You building something here?" she asked. Jason didn't answer at first. Instead, he planted the first sunflower, straight and firm. Then another and another. A perfect circle, 12 broad seeds arranged like numbers on a clock. "It's a memorial," he finally said, "for the ones who didn't make it home." Sarah's breath caught softly. She placed the last plant in the circle, covering its roots gently. "They would like this." Jason nodded. "They deserve light." Max circled the ring and sat beside Jason. The dog tilted his head back and released 3 low, steady howls. They echoed across the bowl, bouncing off the rock walls, filling the air with an ancient grounding harmony. Jason closed his eyes, letting the sound wash over him. Safe. Stay. This is home. A language spoken without words, yet understood perfectly. By the end of spring, Sunflower Hollow had a new reputation. Not a tourist attraction, not a battlefield, but a sanctuary. People arrived not for spectacle, but for quiet, for healing, for the steady warmth of a hidden place untouched by cold. Word spread across counties. If your heart is heavy, go to the hollow. Walk between the sunflowers. The man there, Jason, and his dog. They'll help you find your footing again. Jason knew he hadn't saved the mountain. The mountain had saved him. And now, piece by piece, it was saving others too. One golden petal at a time. In the quiet months that followed, Sunflower Hollow became more than a breathtaking valley or a hidden miracle of the earth. It became a living story, one whispered from porch to porch, carried gently through church halls, and held close by those who knew what it was like to feel lost before finding a place that welcomed them without question. Jason often stood on the ridge at dusk, Max resting faithfully at his side, watching visitors trace slow steps between the tall golden blooms. He saw tired shoulders ease, saw tears fall with gratitude, saw laughter reborn where silence once weighed heavy. And in those moments, he understood something Elliot must have known long before him. Healing doesn't always come in grand lightning strikes or roaring revelations. Sometimes it comes as softly as warm soil beneath frozen ground, or the nudge of a loyal dog who refuses to give up on you. Sunflower Hollow didn't erase pain. It transformed it, turning battle scars into bridges, loneliness into community, fear into belonging. The mountain chose Jason, and through him, it chose everyone who needed a sliver of light to move forward again. And maybe, just maybe, that's how God works too. Not always with thunder, but with gentle signs. A blooming flower in winter, a stranger who becomes family, a dog who guards your heart when you can't guard it yourself. If this story touched you, take a moment to share it, comment where you're watching from, and subscribe for more stories of faith, healing, and hope. May God bless you and your loved ones with peace, protection, and a little miracle of your own today.